Baby found a bear cub trapped in a bakery storage room. What Baby did next was sweet justice. The morning air carried something different that day, something that made 3-year-old Lily Morgan pause at the bottom of the stairs. She stood there in her pink pajamas, her small fingers wrapped around her favorite stuffed rabbit, listening to sounds that didn't belong in her father's bakery. Ethan Marshall had been up since 3 in the morning, his hands covered in flour, shaping dough that would soon become the bread his small town loved. The bakery sat on the corner of Maple Street, its windows glowing warm against the darkness that still clung to the early hours. Ethan loved these quiet moments before the world woke up, when it was just him and the rhythmic sounds of his work. But today, those sounds were interrupted by something else, something that made him stop kneading and listen. It started as a soft scratching, barely audible over the hum of the ovens. Then came a whimper, so faint he thought he might have imagined it. Lily had woken up earlier than usual, drawn downstairs by a dream she couldn't quite remember. She often came down to watch her father work, sitting on the tall stool behind the counter, swinging her legs and asking endless questions about why bread needed to sleep before it could wake up in the oven. But this morning, she didn't head for her usual spot. Instead, she walked slowly toward the storage room door, her head tilted to one side, as if she could hear something calling to her. Ethan watched his daughter, puzzled by her behavior. She never went near the storage room, had never shown any interest in the bags of flour and sugar stacked inside. Yet here she was, reaching for the door handle that was almost too high for her to reach. "Lily, sweetheart, what are you doing?" Ethan asked, wiping his hands on his apron as he walked over to her. She looked up at him with those big brown eyes that reminded him so much of her late mother, Jessica. It had been 2 years since Jessica passed away. 2 years of learning to be both mother and father, baker and bedtime story reader. Lily didn't answer him with words. Instead, she pointed at the door and made a soft sound, almost like she was trying to mimic something she'd heard. Ethan felt a strange chill run down his spine, not from fear, but from something he couldn't quite name. He gently moved Lily aside and reached for the door handle himself. The storage room was always kept locked at night, but this morning, he noticed the lock was hanging loose, the door slightly ajar. The smell hit him first, wild and earthy, completely out of place among the familiar scents of yeast and vanilla. He pushed the door open slowly, his body tensing as he prepared for anything. The storage room was dim, lit only by a small window high on the wall. Bags of flour were stacked against one wall, sugar and other supplies lined the shelves. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but then he heard it again, that soft whimpering sound. It was coming from behind the flour bags. Ethan moved carefully, his heart beating faster with each step. Lily followed close behind, her small hand gripping the back of his apron. As he moved the first bag aside, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. There, huddled in the corner, was a bear cub. The cub couldn't have been more than a few months old, its fur dark brown with a lighter patch on its chest. It looked up at them with frightened eyes, pressing itself further into the corner. Ethan's first instinct was to grab Lily and run, to get them both out of there as quickly as possible. Bears meant danger, everyone knew that. If there was a cub, the mother couldn't be far behind. But something made him pause. The cub wasn't acting aggressive. It was trembling, its small body shaking with what looked like fear or cold. And there was something else, something that made Ethan's protective instincts override his fear. The cub had a cut on its paw, not deep but enough to cause pain. It held the injured paw close to its body, occasionally licking at it with a small pink tongue. Lily, showing no fear at all, took a step forward. "Daddy, baby hurt," she said in her simple way of speaking. She crouched down, making herself smaller, less threatening. The cub watched her with wary eyes, but didn't try to move away. Ethan reached for his daughter, wanting to pull her back to safety, but stopped when he saw what happened next. Lily held out her stuffed rabbit toward the cub, the same rabbit she never let out of her sight, the one that had belonged to her mother. The gesture was so pure, so innocent, that it took Ethan's breath away. The cub sniffed the air, its small nose twitching. Then, slowly, so slowly, it took a tiny step forward. "Lily, don't move," Ethan whispered, though his daughter seemed to understand instinctively what to do. She stayed perfectly still, the rabbit extended in her small hand. The cub took another step, then another, until it was close enough to sniff the toy. Its nose touched the soft fabric, and for a moment the three of them existed in a bubble of impossible peace. A wild animal, a small child, and a father whose world had just tilted on its axis. The moment was broken by the sound of the bell above the bakery's front door. Someone had come in, which was strange because the bakery didn't open for another hour. Ethan heard footsteps, heavy boots on the wooden floor. "Mr. Marshall, Ethan, you in here?" The voice belonged to Connor Adams, the local park ranger. Ethan's mind raced. How did Connor know to come here? Had someone seen the cub enter the bakery? But that didn't make sense. The cub couldn't have just walked through the front door. Ethan stood up slowly, gesturing for Lily to stay where she was. She nodded, still holding out the rabbit to the cub, who had retreated a few steps but hadn't run back to its corner. Ethan walked out of the storage room, closing the door most of the way behind him. Connor stood in the middle of the bakery, his ranger uniform crisp despite the early hour. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that usually made people feel safe, but this morning, something in his expression made Ethan uneasy. "Morning, Connor," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice casual. "You're up early. Coffee won't be ready for another half hour." Connor didn't smile, didn't engage in the usual small-town pleasantries. "We've had reports of a bear cub in the area, Ethan. Someone saw it near your bakery last night. I need to check your property." The words were professional, but there was something else in Connor's tone, an urgency that seemed excessive for a single bear cub sighting. Ethan's protective instincts flared. He thought of the frightened creature in his storage room, of Lily still in there with it. "A bear cub? That's unusual for this time of year, isn't it?" Ethan said, stalling for time while his mind worked through the situation. "Very unusual," Connor agreed, his eyes scanning the bakery as if he could see through walls. "That's why we need to find it quickly. A cub this young. Separated from its mother, it won't survive long on its own." There was truth in Connor's words, but also something that didn't sit right with Ethan. The ranger seemed too eager, too focused. And how had the cub gotten into a locked storage room? The questions multiplied in Ethan's mind, but before he could voice any of them, he heard Lily's voice from the storage room. She was humming, the same lullaby Jessica used to sing to her. The sound was soft, soothing, and impossibly, Ethan heard an answering sound from the cub, a gentle rumbling that almost sounded like purring. Connor's head snapped toward the storage room. What was that? He started moving toward the door, but Ethan stepped in his path. "Connor, wait, let me explain." But Connor wasn't listening. He pushed past Ethan, his hand reaching for something on his belt. Not a gun, Ethan realized with relief, but a tranquilizer dart gun. The ranger pushed open the storage room door, and the scene that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Lily was sitting on the floor now, the bear cub curled up beside her. The cub's injured paw rested on Lily's lap, and she was gently petting its head with one small hand. The stuffed rabbit lay between them, and both child and cub looked completely at peace. "Dear God," Connor breathed, the tranquilizer gun hanging forgotten at his side. The moment stretched, nobody moving, nobody speaking. Then the cub lifted its head and looked directly at Connor. The fear returned to its eyes, and it pressed closer to Lily, as if seeking her protection. Lily looked up at the ranger with a frown. "No hurt, baby," she said firmly, her 3-year-old voice carrying surprising authority. Connor looked from the child to the cub to Ethan, clearly struggling with the situation. "Mr. Marshall, this is highly dangerous. That's a wild animal." "It could hurt Lily." "Does it look like it's going to hurt her?" Ethan asked quietly. He moved to stand beside Connor, both men watching the unlikely pair on the floor. "Look at them, Connor. Really look. That cub is terrified, injured, and somehow it ended up in my locked storage room. Doesn't that strike you as odd?" Connor's jaw tightened. "What are you suggesting?" Ethan thought about his next words carefully. "I'm suggesting that maybe this cub didn't wander in here by accident. Maybe someone put it here." The ranger's expression darkened. "That would be illegal. Wildlife trafficking is a serious crime." "So is breaking and entering," Ethan pointed out. "Someone broke into my bakery to leave a bear cub. Why would anyone do that?" Before Connor could answer, they heard a vehicle pull up outside. Through the bakery window, Ethan saw a van with no official markings, just plain white. 2 people got out, a man and a woman, both wearing what looked like animal control uniforms, but with no insignia, no identification. Connor's entire demeanor changed. He quickly holstered his tranquilizer gun and stepped back from the storage room door. "Those are my colleagues," he said, but Ethan heard the lie in his voice. "Since when does the Park Service use unmarked vans?" Ethan asked. Connor didn't answer. The 2 newcomers entered the bakery without knocking, without announcing themselves. The woman was tall and thin, with sharp features and cold eyes. The man was shorter, stockier, with the look of someone who was used to physical work. They both looked at Connor expectantly. "Is it here?" the woman asked without preamble. Connor nodded toward the storage room. "It's in there, but we have a situation." The woman's eyes narrowed. "What kind of situation?" Ethan stepped forward. "The kind where you explain who you are and what you're doing in my bakery." The woman barely glanced at him. "This doesn't concern you, sir. We're here for the animal." She started toward the storage room, but Ethan moved to block her path. "This is my property, and that's my daughter in there. Nothing happens until I get some answers." The woman's expression turned icy. "Sir, you're interfering with official business." "What official business?" Ethan challenged. "You have no badges, no identification. For all I know, you're the ones who broke into my bakery last night." The man stepped forward, his posture threatening. "You need to step aside, now." But Ethan stood his ground. He'd been pushed around enough in his life, had lost enough. He wasn't going to let these people, whoever they were, harm that frightened cub or upset his daughter. "Connor," he said, not taking his eyes off the strangers, "you want to tell me what's really going on here?" Connor shifted uncomfortably. "Ethan, it's complicated. The cub, it's not from around here." "No kidding," Ethan said dryly. "We don't have wild bears in this area, so where did it come from?" The woman answered before Connor could. "That's classified information. All you need to know is that we're here to retrieve it." From the storage room came the sound of Lily's voice, singing now, the words of the lullaby clear and sweet. "Mommy's little star, shining from afar, watching over me, wherever you may be." It was the song Jessica had made up for Lily when she was a baby, a song no one else knew. Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. The cub must have relaxed at the sound because they heard it make that rumbling purr again. "That animal is dangerous," the man said, reaching for something in his pocket. Ethan didn't wait to see what it was. "Lily, sweetheart, can you come here, please?" His daughter's voice came back, calm and unafraid. "Daddy, baby's sleeping. Shh." The woman made an impatient sound and pushed past Ethan. He grabbed her arm, stopping her. "You're not going near my daughter." The man moved toward him, but Connor suddenly stepped between them. "Okay, everyone just calm down," the ranger said, his hands raised. "Let's handle this peacefully." The woman yanked her arm free from Ethan's grip. "Connor, you were supposed to have this under control." "It is under control," Connor said, but he sounded uncertain. "The cub is contained. No one's been hurt. Yet," the man added ominously. Ethan had heard enough. He pulled out his cell phone. "I'm calling the real authorities, the police, animal control, maybe the local news. Let's see how you explain this to them." The woman's face went pale. "You can't do that." "Watch me," Ethan said, starting to dial. "Wait." Connor grabbed the phone from Ethan's hand. "Please, just wait. Let me explain." Ethan looked at the ranger, seeing real fear in his eyes now. "You have 30 seconds. Connor glanced at his supposed colleagues, then back at Ethan. The cub was being transported illegally. These people, he gestured to the man and woman, they're not with the Park Service, they're private contractors. "You mean smugglers," Ethan said flatly. Connor's silence was answer enough. "And you're involved in this?" Ethan couldn't hide his disappointment. He'd known Connor for years, had thought he was one of the good guys. "No," Connor said quickly. "I mean, not willingly. They have leverage on me. My sister, she got into some trouble. And these people offered to make it go away if I helped them just this once." The woman stepped forward. "Touching story, but irrelevant. We're taking the cub." "No," Ethan said simply. "You're not." The man pulled out what Ethan now saw was a taser. "You don't have a choice." But before anyone could move, Lily emerged from the storage room. She was carrying the cub in her arms, the small animal clinging to her like a baby. It should have been impossible, a 3-year-old carrying a bear cub, but somehow she managed it. The cub's eyes were half closed, completely trusting. "Bad people," Lily announced, looking directly at the two strangers. "Baby knows. Baby's scared of bad people." The woman reached for the cub, but it bared its tiny teeth and made a sound that was supposed to be a growl, but came out more like a squeaky hinge. Lily turned away, shielding the cub with her body. "No, you no take, baby." The situation was spiraling out of control. Ethan moved to his daughter's side. Ready to protect them both. Connor looked torn, conflicted. The two strangers were getting increasingly agitated. And then, in the midst of all this chaos, they heard it. A sound from outside, deep and rumbling. A sound that made everyone in the bakery freeze. It was the sound of an adult bear's roar. Through the window, Ethan saw her. A massive brown bear, standing on her hind legs, pawing at the glass. The mother had come for her cub. The woman and man backed away from the window, fear replacing their earlier confidence. "That's impossible," the woman breathed. "We left her sedated 50 miles from here." But there she was, very much awake and very, very angry. The mother bear dropped to all fours and began circling the bakery, looking for a way in. Her movements were purposeful, intelligent. This wasn't random aggression. This was a mother trying to reach her baby. The cub in Lily's arms perked up, making excited chirping sounds. It struggled to get down, and Lily gently set it on the floor. The cub ran to the window, pressing its paws against the glass. The mother bear stopped pacing and pressed her own paw against the window from the outside, matching her cub's position exactly. The sight was so tender, so human, that even the hardened smugglers seemed affected. "We need to get out of here," the man said nervously. "If that bear gets in—" But Ethan was already moving. He walked to the back door of the bakery, the one that led to the alley. "What are you doing?" Connor asked, alarmed. "What's right?" Ethan said simply. He unlocked the door and pulled it open. Cool morning air flowed in, carrying the scent of pine and earth. "Ethan, no!" Connor shouted, but it was too late. The mother bear had heard the door open. She came around the corner of the building, moving with surprising grace for such a large animal. Everyone in the bakery held their breath as she approached the open door, but the bear didn't charge in. She stopped at the threshold, her dark eyes scanning the interior until they found her cub. The little one was already running toward her, making happy squealing sounds. The reunion was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. The mother bear nuzzled her cub, checking it over for injuries. When she found the cut on its paw, she licked it gently. The cub pressed against her, disappearing into her thick fur. Then the mother bear did something unexpected. She looked directly at Lily and made a soft chuffing sound. It wasn't aggressive or threatening. If Ethan had to describe it, he would have said it sounded almost like gratitude. Lily walked forward slowly, stopping just inside the doorway. The mother bear watched her but made no move to harm her. Lily held out the stuffed rabbit she'd retrieved from the storage room. "For baby," she said solemnly. The mother bear sniffed the toy, then gently took it in her mouth. She backed away from the door, her cub following close beside her. They made it about 10 feet before the cub turned back, looking at Lily one last time. It made a small sound, almost like a goodbye, then hurried after its mother. The two bears disappeared into the woods behind the bakery, the stuffed rabbit still carried carefully in the mother's mouth. The silence that followed was profound. Everyone in the bakery seemed frozen, processing what they'd just witnessed. Finally, the woman spoke. Her voice shaky. "This never happened, you understand? None of this happened." She and the man hurried out of the bakery, practically running to their van. Within moments, they were gone, leaving only Connor, Ethan, and Lily. Connor sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." Ethan looked at the ranger, seeing not a criminal, but a man who'd made a terrible mistake trying to help someone he loved. "Your sister?" Connor nodded miserably. "She got mixed up with the wrong people, owes them money. They said if I helped them transport some animals, just once they'd forgive her debt." "And you believed them?" Ethan asked. Connor laughed bitterly. "I was desperate. You don't know what it's like watching someone you love heading down a dark path and not being able to stop them." But Ethan did know. He'd watched Jessica fight cancer for 2 years, had felt that same helplessness. "What will you do now?" Connor stood up, straightening his uniform. "Turn myself in. It's the only way to make this right. Those people need to be stopped, and I'm the only one who can identify them." Before Connor left, he knelt down to Lily's level. "You're a brave little girl, you know that? You saved that cub." Lily smiled. "Baby was scared, like when I have bad dreams. Mommy says, be brave for scared things." Connor's eyes misted. "Your mommy was a smart lady." After the ranger left, Ethan closed the bakery for the day. He needed time to process everything that had happened. He and Lily sat in the kitchen, sharing a plate of cookies he'd baked the day before. "Daddy," Lily said through a mouthful of chocolate chip cookie, Will baby come back? Ethan thought about lying, about saying yes to make her happy. But Jessica had always believed in telling children the truth, in age-appropriate ways. I don't think so, sweetheart. The baby needs to stay with its mommy. Out in the forest, where they belong. Lily nodded solemnly. Like mommy had to go to heaven? The question caught Ethan off guard, as Lily's questions often did. Yes, kind of like that. Sometimes people and animals have to go where they belong, even if we miss them. But mommy left me her songs, Lily said, and baby's mommy took my rabbit. So baby will remember me. The simple wisdom of his 3-year-old daughter took Ethan's breath away. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. The baby will remember you. That evening, as Ethan was tucking Lily into bed, she asked for the story of the brave baby bear. So Ethan told her, adding little details to make her giggle, like how the baby bear probably told all its forest friends about the little girl who shared her most precious toy. As he was leaving her room, Lily called out, "Daddy, I'm not sad about my rabbit." "No? Why not, sweetheart?" "Because now a baby bear is sleeping with it." Mommy would like that. Ethan had to leave the room quickly so Lily wouldn't see him cry. Jessica would indeed have liked that. She would have been proud of their daughter's compassion and bravery. In the kitchen, Ethan found a note that hadn't been there before. It was from Connor, brief and to the point. "Did the right thing. They're all in custody. Your daughter saved more than just one cub today. She saved dozens of animals from a trafficking ring. Thank you for giving me the courage to do what was right. Connor." Ethan folded the note and put it away. Someday, when Lily was older, he'd tell her the full story of what her kindness had accomplished. But for now, it was enough that she'd learned the most important lesson Jessica had always tried to teach. That kindness and bravery could change the world, one small act at a time. The next morning, Ethan opened the bakery as usual. The regular customers came in, ordering their usual items, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded just 24 hours earlier. But something had changed. The bakery felt different somehow, warmer, more alive. Maybe it was just Ethan's imagination, but he could swear he could still smell that wild, earthy scent mixed in with the bread and pastries. Around mid-morning, Mrs. Henderson from the library came in. She was carrying a large bag and had an odd expression on her face. "Ethan, the strangest thing happened this morning," she said. "I found this on the library steps." She pulled out a stuffed rabbit, worn and familiar, with a note tied around its neck. Ethan's hands shook as he took the toy. It was definitely Lily's rabbit, though it now smelled of pine and earth. The note was written in clumsy handwriting, as if someone unused to holding a pen had struggled to form the letters. "Thank you for saving my baby. A mother knows another mother's love. This belongs with the little one." Mrs. Henderson was watching him curiously. "Do you know what this means?" Ethan clutched the rabbit, thinking of Jessica, of mother bears and mother humans, of the connections that transcend species and even death. "Yes," he said softly, "I know exactly what it means." That afternoon, when Lily came down from her nap, Ethan presented her with the rabbit. Her face lit up with joy. "Baby's mommy brought it back." "Seems like it," Ethan agreed, deciding not to question the impossible logistics of a bear returning a toy and writing a note. Some mysteries were better left unsolved. Lily hugged the rabbit tight, then looked up at her father with those wise brown eyes. "Daddy, do you think Mommy helped the baby's mommy find us?" Ethan pulled his daughter into a hug. "I think that's exactly what happened, sweetheart." And in that moment, in the warm, fragrant safety of their bakery, with the impossible scent of wild places still lingering in the air, Ethan believed it was true. Love had a way of transcending boundaries, of connecting hearts across impossible distances. Jessica had always said that love was the most powerful force in the universe. Now, Ethan understood that she meant all love, not just human love, but the fierce, protective love of all mothers for their children. The story should have ended there, but life, as Ethan had learned, rarely followed neat narrative structures. 3 days later, he was preparing the morning's first batch of bread when he heard a familiar scratching at the back door. His heart racing, he opened it to find not a bear, but a small basket. Inside was a honeycomb, still dripping with golden honey, and another note. Bears remember kindness. This forest remembers you. Friends. Ethan brought the honeycomb inside, marveling at its perfect hexagonal structures. He'd use it in his baking, he decided. Special honey cakes that would carry just a hint of wildness, a taste of the forest's gratitude. When the customers asked about the unique flavor, he'd just smile and say it was a secret ingredient, delivered by special friends. But the real magic happened a week later. Connor returned to the bakery, not in his ranger uniform but in civilian clothes. He looked tired, but somehow lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I wanted to thank you," he said, accepting the cup of coffee Ethan offered, "and to tell you something remarkable." He explained that the trafficking ring had been operating for years, moving exotic animals through a complex network. The two people who'd come to the bakery were just small players in a much larger operation, but their arrest, combined with Connor's testimony, had unraveled the entire network. "Over 100 animals have been rescued," Connor said, his eyes bright with emotion. "Bears, wolves, even some big cats, all because your daughter showed kindness to one scared cub." But that wasn't the most remarkable part. Connor pulled out his phone and showed Ethan a video. It was grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but unmistakable. It showed the mother bear and her cub playing in a meadow. The cub was batting at something with its paws, and when the camera zoomed in, Ethan could see it was Lily's stuffed rabbit. "My colleague took this yesterday," Connor explained. "That meadow is 20 miles from here, deep in protected forest. They're safe, Ethan. They're both safe." Ethan watched the video again, noting how healthy the cub looked, how its injured paw seemed to have healed completely. "What will happen to you?" he asked Connor. The former ranger shrugged. "Community service, probation. I lost my job, of course, but considering what I was involved in, it's a light sentence. The judge took into account my cooperation and the fact that I turned myself in." He paused, then added, "I'm thinking of starting over. Maybe becoming a teacher, working with kids. Your daughter taught me something important about innocence and bravery. Maybe I can pass that on." After Connor left, Ethan stood in his bakery, surrounded by the familiar sights and smells of his daily life, but seeing it all differently now. The ordinary had become extraordinary. His quiet bakery had been the stage for a drama involving crime rings and wild animals, but more importantly, it had been a place where love and kindness had triumphed over fear and greed. That evening, as he was closing up, a family came in just as he was about to flip the sign. They were travelers, passing through town, and the children were tired and hungry. Normally, Ethan might have politely told them he was closed, but something made him invite them in. He gave them free samples of everything, watching the children's faces light up at the sweet treats. The mother tried to pay, but Ethan waved her off. "Sometimes," he said, thinking of bears and babies, and the unexpected ways kindness returns to us. Sometimes the best things in life are free. The family left with full bellies and warm smiles, and Ethan realized this was how it worked. Kindness rippled outward like drops in a pond. Lily's compassion for a scared cub had saved hundreds of animals. Those animals would live free because a 3-year-old girl had offered her most precious possession to a frightened baby. And now, that kindness would continue spreading, through Connor's future students, through the family Ethan had just fed, through everyone who heard the story. Speaking of the story, it had begun to spread through the town, growing and changing with each telling. Some versions had the bear cub talking to Lily. Others had the mother bear leaving gifts every night. Ethan didn't correct these embellishments. He understood that sometimes truth was less important than the deeper truth the stories conveyed, that compassion transcends species, that bravery comes in all sizes, and that love, real love, never truly dies. It just transforms, showing up in unexpected places, like a wild bear carrying a child's toy into the forest. 1 month after the incident, Ethan was teaching Lily to shape dough for the first time. Her small hands were clumsy but determined, and she laughed when the dough stuck to her fingers. As they worked side by side, Ethan heard her humming. It was the lullaby, the one Jessica had created. But Lily had added new verses, something about brave bears and kind bakers and mothers watching from the stars. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Ethan said. "Did you make that up?" Lily nodded proudly, for Baby Bear. So Baby knows the song too. And maybe, Ethan thought, somewhere in the forest, a small bear cub was listening to the wind in the trees and hearing somehow the echo of a little girl's song. Stranger things had happened. He'd learned that the world was full of impossible connections, of love that refused to recognize boundaries. The afternoon sun slanted through the bakery windows, turning the flour dust in the air into tiny dancing stars. Lily laughed and tried to catch them, her hands leaving flowery prints on everything she touched. Ethan didn't stop her. Let her make a mess, he thought. Let her believe in magic and kindness and the possibility that love could bridge any gap. Because she was right to believe it. The evidence was all around them, in the honey that tasted of wildness, in the rabbit that had impossibly returned, in the way their small act of kindness had destroyed an entire criminal network. The world was full of darkness. Yes, but it was also full of light. And sometimes all it took was one small hand reaching out in compassion to tip the balance. As the day drew to a close and the last customer left with their evening bread, Ethan and Lily stood in their flour-dusted bakery, surrounded by the warmth of ovens and the sweet smell of fresh pastries. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the forest, a mother bear and her cub were settling down for the night, the cub perhaps clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. And in the bakery on Maple Street, a father and daughter were writing their own story of love and loss, of kindness and courage, one day at a time. The story that had begun with fear, with a strange sound in the storage room, had transformed into something else entirely. It had become a testament to the power of innocence, to the idea that sometimes the smallest among us are the bravest, and that kindness, once given, returns to us in ways we never expected. Ethan thought about the note the mother bear had supposedly left. A mother knows another mother's love. Jessica would have loved this story. She would have been so proud of Lily, of the way their daughter had inherited her compassion and courage, and maybe, in some way that Ethan couldn't quite understand but chose to believe, Jessica had been part of this story. Her love, living on in Lily, had been the bridge between two mothers, two species, two worlds. As he locked up the bakery that night, Ethan paused at the back door, the one through which the bears had departed. He'd taken to leaving it unlocked some nights just in case. Not for bears necessarily, but for whatever kindness might need shelter. Because that's what his bakery had become, he realized. Not just a place for bread and pastries, but a sanctuary for the lost and frightened. A place where impossible things could happen. The next morning brought a surprise. When Ethan arrived at the bakery at his usual pre-dawn hour, he found a small crowd gathered outside. At first, he worried something was wrong, but then he saw their faces. They were smiling, some holding children, all looking expectant. "We heard the story," one woman said, "about your daughter and the bear cub. We wanted to buy our bread from a place where miracles happen." Ethan wanted to protest that it hadn't been a miracle, just a series of strange coincidences and acts of kindness. But looking at their hopeful faces, he understood that they needed to believe in miracles, needed to know that kindness could triumph over cruelty. So he opened early, serving coffee and fresh pastries to the gathered crowd. As they ate and talked, sharing their own stories of unexpected kindness and strange coincidences, Ethan realized something profound. The miracle wasn't just what had happened with the bears. The miracle was this: people coming together sharing stories, believing in the possibility of goodness. Lily woke up earlier than usual, drawn by the sound of voices. She came downstairs in her pajamas, dragging her returned rabbit behind her. When the crowd saw her, a hush fell. Then someone started clapping, and soon everyone was applauding the little girl who had saved a bear cub with nothing more than kindness and a stuffed toy. Lily, confused but pleased by the attention, did what came naturally to her. She walked through the crowd, offering hugs to anyone who wanted one. And they did want them. These adults who had forgotten what it was like to believe in simple goodness, who needed to touch something pure and innocent. One elderly man, tears streaming down his face, knelt to Lily's level. "Thank you," he said simply. "My grandson loves bears. He's been sick, but when I told him your story, he smiled for the first time in weeks." Lily patted the man's cheek with her small hand. "Bears are brave," she said solemnly. "Your grandson is brave too." The man nodded, unable to speak, and Ethan understood that this was how healing happened, one small gesture at a time, one story spreading light into dark corners. As the morning progressed, more people came. Some brought offerings, toys for Lily, honey for the bakery, donations for wildlife conservation. Ethan tried to refuse, but they insisted. This wasn't charity, they said. This was community. This was people choosing to believe in something good. By noon, the bakery was more crowded than it had ever been. Local news showed up, wanting to interview Ethan and Lily, but Ethan politely declined. Some stories, he felt, were better left to word of mouth, to grow and change organically, becoming what people needed them to be. But one interview he did accept was from a young girl, maybe 10 years old, who was doing a school project on local heroes. She had a little notebook and asked very serious questions. "Why do you think the bear trusted Lily?" she asked. Ethan thought carefully before answering. "I think trust recognizes trust." Lily approached the cub without fear, with only the intention to help. Animals can sense that. The girl wrote this down carefully, then asked, "Do you think the bears will come back?" "Not physically," Ethan said. "They need to stay wild, stay free. But I think they'll always be with us in a different way. In the stories we tell, in the kindness we show to frightened creatures, in the way we remember that we're all connected." The girl nodded as if this made perfect sense, and maybe to her it did. Children understood these things better than adults, understood that love and connection weren't bound by the usual rules. As the day wore on, Ethan noticed something wonderful happening. People weren't just coming for the story, they were sharing their own. A woman told about finding an injured owl and nursing it back to health. A man shared how his dog had saved his child from drowning. Story after story of the mysterious connections between humans and animals, of kindness transcending species. And at the center of it all was Lily, playing with the other children, sharing her rabbit, telling her version of the story which grew more elaborate with each telling. In her version, the baby bear could talk, and it promised to protect the forest for all the children. The mother bear was a queen of the woods, and she'd made Lily an honorary bear princess. The adults smiled at these embellishments, but Ethan noticed something in their eyes, a wish that Lily's version was the true one, that the world really was that magical. That evening, after the crowds had finally dispersed and the bakery was quiet again, Ethan and Lily sat on the back steps, looking out at the woods where the bears had disappeared. The sun was setting, painting everything gold, and somewhere in the distance they could hear birds singing their evening songs. "Daddy," Lily said, leaning against him, "are we famous now?" Ethan laughed softly. "Maybe a little bit. Does that bother you?" Lily shook her head. "No, but Baby Bear is famous too, right?" "Definitely," Ethan agreed. "The most famous bear cub in the state." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Lily asked, "Do you think Mommy knows about the bears?" Ethan pulled her closer. "I think Mommy knows everything important that happens to us, and I think she's very proud of you." "I'm proud of her too," Lily said matter-of-factly, "for sending the bears to us." Ethan didn't correct her. Who was he to say Jessica hadn't somehow orchestrated this whole thing from whatever came after? He'd learned that the world was far stranger and more connected than he'd ever imagined. As the stars began to appear, they heard a sound from the forest. Not a bear this time, but an owl hooting softly. Then another answered, and another, until the night was filled with their calls. It sounded like a conversation, like the forest itself was talking. "They're saying thank you," Lily announced, with the confidence only a 3-year-old could have. "Thank you for what?" Ethan asked. "For being kind, for remembering that we're all family." And maybe she was right. Maybe the owls were expressing gratitude. Maybe the whole forest knew what had happened in the little bakery on Maple Street, or maybe it was just owls being owls. But Ethan had learned that sometimes the story we choose to believe is more important than the facts. As they went inside to get ready for bed, Ethan noticed something he'd missed before. On the door frame of the back door, at about bear height, were several deep scratches, but they weren't random or aggressive. They formed a pattern, almost like a heart? Or maybe a star. Or maybe just scratches. But Lily saw them too and clapped her hands in delight. "Baby Bear signed our door. Now everyone will know this is a safe place." And from that day forward, Ethan never painted over those scratches. They became part of the bakery's charm, part of its story. People would run their fingers over them, making wishes, leaving prayers, believing in the possibility of connection between worlds. The scratches became famous in their own right. Featured in articles about the bakery, photographed by tourists, touched by children who believed they held magic. 2 chapters of mentioned part has completed. But the most remarkable thing happened 6 months later. Winter had come to the town, blanketing everything in snow. The bakery was warm and cozy, filled with the smell of cinnamon and nutmeg. Ethan was teaching Lily to make gingerbread bears, a new recipe he'd developed in honor of their adventure. As they worked, shaping the dough into little bear families, Ethan heard something at the back door. Not scratching this time, but a soft thump. When he opened it, he found a pile of pine cones, each one perfect and unopened, arranged in a careful pyramid. On top was a single brown feather, possibly from an owl, possibly from something else. There were no footprints in the snow, no indication of who or what had left this offering. But Ethan knew. He gathered up the pine cones and brought them inside, where they would decorate the bakery for the winter season. The feather he gave to Lily, who immediately declared it was from the baby bear, who had learned to fly. Because in her world, anything was possible. And really, who was to say she was wrong? They'd already seen impossible things happen. A bear returning a toy, a criminal ring destroyed by kindness, a community brought together by a story of compassion. As winter deepened, the bakery became even more of a gathering place. People came not just for the bread and pastries, but for the warmth, both literal and figurative. They came to be part of something special, something that reminded them that goodness existed in the world. Ethan started a tradition of story nights, where people could share their own tales of unexpected kindness, of connections that shouldn't exist but did. The events grew popular, drawing people from neighboring towns. But the rule was simple. Every story had to be true, or at least believed to be true by the teller. The stories were amazing. A woman whose cat had led her to a lost child. A man whose deceased father's favorite bird appeared at significant moments in his life. Children who swore their pets could understand them. Each story added to the tapestry of belief that was being woven in the little bakery. And always, at the center of it all, was the story of Lily and the bear cub. It had become legend now, growing with each telling. Some versions had the bears returning every full moon to check on Lily. Others said that any child who touched the scratches on the door would be protected by forest spirits. Ethan didn't mind the embellishments. He understood that myths and legends served a purpose, gave people hope, made them believe in something larger than themselves. And who was he to say where truth ended and legend began? He'd lived through the original events and still wasn't entirely sure what had been real and what had been miracle. One snowy evening, as story night was winding down, a stranger entered the bakery. He was an older man, weathered and worn, with the look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. He listened to the last few stories, then raised his hand to speak. "I'm a tracker," he said simply. "Been tracking animals for 40 years. Bears, mostly. And I want to tell you something about the bears in this story you all love." The room fell silent, everyone leaning in to hear. Bears don't behave like that. They don't return toys, they don't write notes, they don't arrange pine cones. Ethan felt the mood in the room shift, disappointment creeping in. But the man wasn't finished. "But," he continued, "I've been tracking the mother and cub from this story, following them through the forest. And I've seen things I can't explain." He pulled out his phone, showing a video. It was the mother bear and her cub, now much larger, playing in a meadow. But what made everyone gasp was what the cub was doing. It was arranging stones in a pattern, deliberately, carefully, almost like it was creating art. "This cub is different," the tracker said. "It problem solves in ways I've never seen. It seems to understand things beyond normal bear comprehension." And, he paused, looking directly at Lily. "It still carries that stuffed rabbit everywhere." The room erupted in excited chatter, but the tracker held up his hand for silence. "There's more. Other animals in that forest have started behaving differently too. More cooperatively, less fearfully. It's like the whole ecosystem has been changed by what happened here." He looked around the room at all the wondering faces. "I'm a man of science. I believe in facts and evidence, but I also believe that sometimes kindness can change things in ways we don't understand. Maybe it actually rewires brains. Maybe it creates connections we can't see. Or maybe, he smiled, maybe magic is just science we haven't figured out yet. The tracker left soon after, but his words lingered. They gave permission for both skeptics and believers to coexist, for mystery and fact to dance together. That night, as Ethan was closing up, he found Lily in the storage room where it had all begun. She was sitting in the exact spot where she'd first found the cub, her returned rabbit in her arms. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" he asked. "Remembering," she said simply, "so I never forget." Ethan sat down beside her on the floor. "You won't forget. It's part of you now." "Daddy," Lily said, looking up at him with those wise eyes, "do you think we'll have more adventures?" Ethan thought about the tracker's words, about ecosystems changed by kindness, about the way their small bakery had become a beacon of hope for so many people. "I think," he said carefully, "that every day is an adventure when you approach it with an open heart." Lily nodded, satisfied with this answer. Then she stood up, brushed off her pants, and headed for the door. But she paused at the threshold, looking back at the corner where the cub had hidden. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room. Or maybe it wasn't empty. Maybe it was full of memories, of possibilities, of the lingering presence of fear transformed into love. As they walked back into the main bakery, Ethan noticed something new. Someone had left a painting propped against the counter. It showed a little girl and a bear cub, surrounded by light, with a ghostly figure of a woman watching over them. The style was amateur but heartfelt, and at the bottom was written, "Some angels have fur, some have flour on their hands, all have love in their hearts." There was no signature, no indication of who had left it, but Ethan knew he would hang it in the bakery, another piece of the ever-growing story. Because that's what this had become, not just their story, but everyone's. A story that reminded people that kindness mattered, that small acts could have enormous consequences, that the world was more connected and mysterious than anyone imagined. Winter turned to spring, and with it came new life. The bakery's garden, which Ethan had started letting grow wild, became a haven for birds and butterflies. Lily spent hours there talking to the creatures, leaving out seeds and water. And sometimes, just sometimes, Ethan could swear he saw larger shadows at the edge of the woods, watching, protecting. One day, a letter arrived at the bakery. It was from Connor, the former park ranger. He'd become a teacher, as he'd planned, and was working at a school for troubled youth. "I tell them your story," he wrote. "About how one moment of kindness can change everything. About how it's never too late to choose the right path. 3 of my students have decided to become wildlife rehabilitators because of Lily's bravery." The ripples continued to spread. Ethan read the letter to Lily, who was now 4 and even more articulate about her experience. "Mr. Connor learned to be good again," she said with satisfaction. "The bears taught him. And maybe they had. Maybe the bears had taught them all something about trust, about the courage required for both kindness and accepting kindness, about the way love transcends boundaries and species and even death." As spring deepened into summer, the first anniversary of the event approached. Ethan expected it to pass quietly, but the town had other ideas. They organized a festival, the Kindness to All Creatures Festival, complete with booths for animal welfare organizations, storytelling circles, and of course, a bake sale featuring Ethan's special honey cakes. The highlight was meant to be Lily telling the story herself, but when the moment came, she was nowhere to be found. Panic set in briefly until someone spotted her at the edge of the woods, standing very still. Ethan rushed over, worried something was wrong. But as he got closer, he saw what had captured her attention. There, just visible through the trees, were two bears. The mother, massive and majestic, and her cub, now much larger but still recognizable by the white patch on its chest. And yes, clutched in the cub's mouth was the raggedy stuffed rabbit. The crowd had followed Ethan, but they all stopped at a respectful distance, understanding the sanctity of the moment. Lily raised her hand in a small wave. The cub lifted one paw, almost like it was waving back. Or maybe it was just shifting its weight. But everyone there chose to believe it was a wave. The bears lingered for just a moment more, then melted back into the forest. But the gift they'd given, the reminder that connections endure, that kindness is remembered, that love transcends all boundaries, that gift remained. Lily turned to the crowd, her face glowing. "They came for my birthday," she announced. It wasn't actually her birthday, but no one corrected her. In a way, it was a birthday, the birth of a new understanding, a new way of seeing the world. The festival continued late into the evening, with music and laughter and stories. But the best moment came at sunset. As the sky turned pink and gold, hundreds of birds suddenly filled the air above the bakery, swooping and diving in patterns that looked almost choreographed. "The forest is saying thank you," Lily announced to anyone who would listen. And maybe it was. Maybe the entire natural world had felt the shift that began in a small storage room, when a frightened cub met a brave little girl. Or maybe it was just birds being birds at sunset, but everyone there, from the smallest child to the most skeptical adult, felt something in that moment. A connection to something larger, older, wilder than themselves. A reminder that they were part of nature, not separate from it. That kindness to any creature was kindness to themselves. As the festival wound down and people began heading home, many stopped to touch the scratches on the bakery door, to buy one more honey cake, to hug Lily if she'd let them. They were taking a piece of the story with them, carrying it back to their own lives, their own choices. Ethan stood in his bakery as the last customer left, surrounded by the remnants of the celebration. Lily had fallen asleep on the counter, her rabbit, she'd started calling it Bear's Rabbit, clutched in her arms. He thought about Jessica, about how proud she would be of what their daughter had become, of what their little bakery had become. It wasn't just a place for bread anymore. It was a sanctuary, a reminder, a beacon. It was proof that small acts of kindness could change the world, one heart at a time. And as he carried Lily up to bed, Ethan heard it again, that sound from the forest. Not a roar or a growl, but something softer. It sounded like the forest itself was breathing, deep and contented, the way Lily breathed when she felt completely safe. The story could end here, with peace and contentment and the promise of connection. But life, as Ethan had learned, always had one more surprise in store. The next morning, when he came down to start the day's baking, he found something impossible. There, on the counter, was a single cupcake. It was crudely made, lopsided and a bit burned, decorated with berries and honey. Next to it was a paw print in flour, too large to be a dog's, too deliberate to be accidental. Ethan stared at it for a long moment, then laughed. He laughed until tears came, laughed at the absurdity and wonder of it all. A bear had tried to bake. It was impossible. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. When Lily came down and saw the cupcake, she wasn't surprised at all. "Baby Bear is learning to bake like us," she announced happily. She insisted they eat the cupcake together, and despite its questionable appearance, it tasted of wild honey and adventure, and the sweetness that comes from unexpected friendship. From that day forward, every so often, they would find small offerings, a particularly perfect acorn, a flower that didn't grow anywhere near their town. Once, memorably, what appeared to be an attempt at bread made from crushed nuts and berries. Each gift was impossible. Each gift was treasured. Each gift reminded them that the world was far more magical than most people believed. The story of the bakery and the bears spread far beyond their small town. Letters came from around the world, from people who'd heard the tale and been inspired to perform their own acts of kindness. A man in Japan who'd saved a tanuki. A woman in Scotland who'd nursed an injured stag. Children everywhere who approached the world with less fear and more wonder. Ethan kept all the letters, planning to give them to Lily when she was older, to show her how far her kindness had reached. But she seemed to already know. She moved through the world with a quiet confidence, a certainty that kindness would be returned, that connection was always possible. One day, when she was 5, she asked Ethan a question that stopped him cold. "Daddy, when I'm grown up, will I still remember how to talk to animals?" Ethan knelt down to her level, choosing his words carefully. "I think," he said, "that as long as you remember that all creatures deserve kindness, you'll always know how to communicate with them. Maybe not with words, but with something better." "Like what Mommy does from heaven?" Lily asked. "Exactly like that," Ethan agreed, marveling at his daughter's understanding. Years passed, as years do. Lily grew taller, started school, made friends. But she never lost that special quality, that ability to see the sacred in the ordinary. The bakery remained a gathering place, the scratches on the door growing smoother from all the hands that touched them, seeking blessing or connection, or just the comfort of being part of something larger. And the bears? They were seen occasionally, always at a distance, always watching. The cub grew into a magnificent adult, but it never lost its unusual intelligence, its problem-solving abilities that the tracker had noticed. It became something of a legend itself, the Einstein of bears, the one who remembered human kindness. Some said it had taught other bears to be less fearful of humans, but only the good humans, the ones who approached with kindness. Others said it could actually understand human speech. Still, others claimed it was magic, a forest spirit in bear form. Ethan didn't speculate. He just continued baking, continued telling the story when asked, continued leaving the back door unlocked some nights, just in case. And sometimes, on very quiet mornings, when the mist rose from the forest and the world felt thin between reality and dream, he could swear he smelled that wild, earthy scent mixed with his baking bread. On those mornings, he always made extra, leaving some on the back step. It was always gone by the time he checked again. 10 years after that first encounter, Lily, now 13, wrote an essay for school about the experience. Her teacher said it was too fantastical, that she should stick to facts, but Lily stood her ground. Sometimes, she wrote in her conclusion, "The most factual thing we can do is acknowledge that the world is more mysterious than we understand. My experience with the bear cub taught me that kindness creates connections we can't always see or explain. But just because we can't explain something doesn't mean it isn't real. The love my mother had for me didn't die when she did. It transformed, became part of the world around me, guiding bears to safety and teaching me that we're all part of one big family. That's not fantasy. That's the deepest truth I know." Her teacher, moved by the conviction in Lily's words, gave her an A. But more importantly, she asked Lily to read the essay at the school assembly. As Lily stood at the podium, telling her story to hundreds of students and teachers, Ethan watched from the back of the auditorium. He saw how the younger children leaned forward, enchanted. He saw how the older students tried to look skeptical but couldn't hide their fascination. He saw how the teachers wiped away tears. But most of all, he saw Jessica in Lily's confidence, in her compassion, in her absolute certainty that love was the most powerful force in the universe. After the assembly, a small boy approached Lily. He was maybe 6, shy, clutching a worn teddy bear. "Is it true?" he whispered. "All of it?" Lily knelt down to his level, just as Ethan had done with her so many times. "What do you think?" she asked gently. The boy considered this seriously. I think true things sometimes sound like fairy tales." Lily smiled, the same smile Jessica used to have. "Then you already understand the most important part." As they walked home that day, Ethan and Lily passed by the woods. It was autumn, the leaves brilliant with color. Without discussing it, they turned onto the forest path, walking deeper into the trees than they usually went. They came to a clearing they'd never seen before, circular and peaceful, carpeted with soft moss. And there, in the center of the clearing, was the stuffed rabbit. It was weathered now, faded from sun and rain, but carefully placed on a small mound of stones, almost like an altar. Around it were offerings, flowers, berries, shiny objects. It looked like a shrine, a place of pilgrimage. Lily picked up the rabbit gently, cradling it like she had when she was 3. "Should we take it home?" Ethan asked. Lily shook her head. "It belongs here now. It's doing important work." She placed it back on its stone altar, arranging it carefully. Then she pulled something from her pocket, a new ribbon she'd been saving for something special. She tied it around the rabbit's neck, bright and colorful against the faded fur. As they turned to leave, they heard it, a soft, chuffing sound, almost like laughter. They looked back to see the bear, the one who had been a cub all those years ago, standing at the edge of the clearing. It was massive now, powerful and wild, but in its eyes was that same intelligence, that same recognition. It walked slowly to the shrine, sniffed the new ribbon, then looked directly at Lily. What passed between them in that moment was beyond words, beyond human understanding. It was recognition, gratitude, promise, and farewell all at once. Then the bear picked up the rabbit gently in its mouth and disappeared into the deeper forest. They never saw it again, though they looked. But the shrine remained, and sometimes they would find new offerings there. A perfect feather, an unusual stone, once a crown woven from wildflowers that was too intricate to be accidental. The bakery continued to thrive, becoming famous not for its pastries, though they were excellent, but for its story. People made pilgrimages from around the world, wanting to touch the scratched door, to stand where kindness had changed everything. But the real magic wasn't in the place. It was in what people took away with them. The understanding that kindness was never wasted, that connections existed between all living things, that love transcended death and species and logic. One day, when Lily was 18 and preparing to leave for college to study wildlife biology, a package arrived at the bakery. It had no return address, just a postmark from deep in the Canadian wilderness. Inside was a photograph and a letter. The photograph showed a vast forest clearing where dozens of bears had gathered, more than should ever be in one place. They were arranged in a circle, and in the center on a raised mound sat the rabbit. The letter was from the old tracker who had visited years before. "I've spent my life studying bears, but what I've witnessed here defies all explanation. The bears gather here every full moon. They bring their cubs, who touch the rabbit one by one, like a blessing or a rite of passage. The bear from your story, the one who was a cub, seems to be teaching them something. I've seen them showing kindness to other species, protecting injured animals, even sharing food with hungry foxes. It's like they're spreading what they learned from your daughter. I'm too old now to make sense of it scientifically. But I wanted you to know that the kindness your daughter showed hasn't just survived. It's thrived and spread through the entire ecosystem. She changed the world, Mr. Marshall. One scared cub at a time. Lily read the letter with tears streaming down her face. Mom would be so proud, she whispered. She is proud, Ethan corrected gently. Wherever she is, she's proud. That night, Lily's last night before college, they kept the bakery open late. The whole town came to say goodbye, to wish her well, to thank her one more time for bringing magic into their lives. As the evening wound down, Lily stood to make a speech. But before she could begin, they heard it, a sound from outside, starting soft, then growing louder. It was howling, but not from wolves. It was bears, dozens of them by the sound of it, their voices raised in what could only be described as a song. Everyone rushed outside to see shadows moving at the forest edge, eyes glowing in the darkness. The bears had come to say goodbye. The howling continued for several minutes, wild and beautiful and impossible. Then silence. When they looked again, the shadows were gone. But on the ground where they'd been standing was a trail of flowers, leading from the forest to the bakery door. Lily followed the trail, picking up each flower until she reached the door. There, placed carefully on the doorstep, was a new stuffed animal. Not a rabbit this time, but a bear. A small bear that looked exactly like the cub she'd saved so many years ago. She picked it up, laughing and crying at the same time. "For my dorm room," she said. So I don't forget where I came from. But she would never forget. None of them would. How could they forget the summer when the impossible became possible? When kindness opened doors between worlds, when a 3-year-old girl and a bear cub taught an entire town about the power of compassion. As Lily left for college the next morning, Ethan stood in his bakery, now empty of his daughter's presence but full of her spirit. He touched the scratches on the door, felt the warmth that always seemed to emanate from them, and made a decision. He would keep telling the story. He would keep baking bread that tasted of kindness and honey cakes that carried just a hint of wildness. He would keep the door unlocked some nights, just in case, because the story wasn't over. It would never be over as long as there were frightened creatures needing kindness, as long as there were brave souls willing to offer it, as long as there were connections waiting to be made between the human world and the wild one. The bakery on Maple Street continued to be a beacon, a reminder, a promise. And sometimes, on very quiet mornings, when the mist rose from the forest and the bread was baking and the world felt full of possibility, Ethan could swear he heard it. The sound of Jessica's laughter mixing with Lily's humming and the gentle chuffing of bears, all blending together into something that sounded like the earth itself singing a song of connection and joy. The story spread and grew, changed and evolved, but at its heart remained the same simple truth. Kindness, real kindness, changes everything. It creates ripples that spread beyond our ability to track them. It builds bridges we didn't know needed building. It transforms fear into love, strangers into family, ordinary moments into miracles. And in a small bakery on a quiet street, where the door still bears the scratches of a frightened cub's claws, where the air still carries just a hint of wildness mixed with baking bread, where love still transcends all boundaries, the miracle continues. Every day, with every act of kindness, with every hand that touches the door seeking blessing, with every child who hears the story and believes, the miracle continues. Because that's what Lily taught them all, that we're all connected, all part of the same family, all capable of creating magic through simple acts of compassion. The bears knew it. The forest knew it. Jessica, watching from wherever souls watch from, knew it. And now, thanks to a brave little girl and a frightened bear cub, the whole world was beginning to know it too. The sweetest justice isn't revenge or punishment. It's the triumph of kindness over fear, connection over isolation, love over indifference. It's the justice of a world where every creature matters, where gentleness is strength, where a 3-year-old with a stuffed rabbit can save not just one bear, but transform an entire community's understanding of what it means to be human. And in that small bakery, where bread rises each morning like hope itself, where the impossible became possible, where love proved stronger than fear, the story continues. It continues in every child who chooses kindness over cruelty. It continues in every adult who remembers that wonder is not childish but essential. It continues in every creature, human or otherwise, who reaches across the divide of species or circumstance to offer comfort to another being. The bears remember. The forest remembers. The town remembers. And as long as memory exists, as long as stories are told, as long as kindness finds a way to triumph over fear, Lily's gift to the world will continue to ripple outward, touching lives she'll never know, healing wounds she'll never see, building bridges she'll never cross. That's the real magic, the true miracle. That one small act of kindness can change everything. And it all started with a little girl who wasn't afraid, a bear cub who needed help, and a stuffed rabbit that became a symbol of the love that connects all living things. In the end, that's all any of us can do. Offer our own stuffed rabbits to the frightened creatures we meet, trust that kindness will be remembered, and believe that love in all its forms will find a way to triumph. The bakery still stands on Maple Street. The door still bears its sacred scratches, and somewhere in the forest, a bear with unusual intelligence teaches its cubs about the time when kindness saved its life, about the little girl who showed it that not all humans are to be feared, about the magic that happens when we choose love over fear. The story ends where it began, with the scent of baking bread and the promise of kindness. But really, it never ends. It just transforms, spreads, grows, like yeast in dough, like love in hearts, like hope in a world that desperately needs to believe in miracles. And maybe, just maybe, if you listen closely on a quiet morning, when the mist rises from the forest and the world feels thin between dream and waking, you can hear it too. The sound of bears singing, of children laughing, of mothers watching over their babies from both sides of the veil, all harmonizing in a song that says the same thing Lily knew from the very beginning. We are all family, we are all connected, and kindness, true kindness, is the most powerful force in the universe.